episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
This is also the second episode of the student discussion series where we talk to students with relevant experience on relevant topics.
With that said, let's get right down to it here. Joining us now is a man who is a graduate of Bishop Canevin High School in Scott Township, Pennsylvania. He is studying to be a history teacher at Duquesne University. He is a man who's lived in Allegheny County for his entire life. The man who politicians talk about over and over and over again as the forgotten man in America. He loves his grandma. He loves Vermin Supreme. He loves John F. Kennedy. But according to I Side With, not as much as he loves John Delaney. Ladies and gentlemen, from the 10th floor of Day Plus Hall to the first floor of his house, James G. Walsh.
Yay. Hi. How are you?
We're doing well. How are you, Jim?
It's cold in this house, even though it's lovely outside. And we're stuck in here, you know.
Yeah. So Jim is our suite mate and also has the distinction of being, I think, the most undecided voter I could possibly imagine.
It's absolutely true. Jim falls in the middle of everything, and we mean that quite literally.
Yeah, when I say your average Jim from Bethel Park or wherever else in the PA region I mentioned, I'm talking about this Jim right here because he is pretty much the most moderate undecided voter, one of those 3% of voters that's likely still undecided in the election.
So Jim, what's the deal? Why are you here other than the fact that we told you to be here? What's your story?
What's my story? I don't know. I mean, I try not to be biased. I've always thought of that. And so it's like, when it came to politics, my dad's Republican, so I'd like listen to him and he'd be like, oh, those are good points. Those are good points. And then I'd go to like listen to other people and they're like, well, that's not it. And I'd like, okay, those are good points. And so I sit down and I go, they're both good points, but they both have flaws in them. And so I feel like it's just natural to like, it's the best of both worlds, but nobody wants to put them together. It's either right or left. And so, yeah.
All right, so just like a few questions just to get a general head of where you're at. What attracts you most to Democrats, both politicians and their beliefs?
With Democrats, they're a lot more caring. They try and focus on everyone. I like how they're looking at the health system not because it's a big money profit where they could possibly get more money out of it and keep in their office. It's let's try and help someone out there that can't help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the Democrats have a good head on their shoulder most of the time, and they're not trying to look for just, oh, I can get this vote if I just tell these people I can do this.
All right, so what attracts you most to Republicans?
Republicans, I feel like they're a lot more logical. I think they see the boundaries and they go, we can't go farther or something bad's going to happen. They can see a limit and understand that limit is there and we can't really cross it. So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So you, before we met, gave us a list of your top 5 policies, just the stuff that means the most to you. So we're going to spend a majority of this episode just discussing those policies, why
that's perfectly fine,
how you vote, and how they might swing your vote one way or the other.
Yeah, because maybe to political candidates who are out there and are concerned with securing an undecided vote in a swing state, they might care about what you think and what you have to say on the policies.
So you're
maybe somebody might care
maybe
about
just
you.
a little.
In theory,
I could think of 2 70-year-old white men that might really care about what you have to say.
Neither of whom have been outside in 2 weeks. But
no.
There's just 2 very distinct personalities.
All right. So to begin, you say infrastructure is your most important issue, and I've heard this a lot from you that you're almost a single issue voter when it comes to infrastructure. So can you just talk about that for a sec?
All right. My infrastructure mainly, I have 2 main ideas on them. One, I thought Pennsylvania roads were just awful. Apparently that's not true since I went up to Toronto and went on the New York interstate system. They're terrible. I later went down into Maryland. Their roads are terrible. And so I feel if we're the United States and we have focused all our resources to these highways into cars and travel, our roads are crappy, and I feel like we need to focus a little bit more on them. Uh, the United States, I feel, just goes and looks and says, "Oh, a cheap option, a quick option can get it done real fast." I got this main idea when they were redoing the Carnegie exit down on 376. It took them, I think, 2 years to do it, and they screwed it up so bad they had to redo it real quick. Another instance was in Bower Hill, right next to my house, where they did the right lane going down towards Bridgeville, and then they decided, oh, we got to do the left lane going up towards Mount Lebanon. And then they said, oh, wow, the roads are uneven, so we need to redo the whole thing. Then a bad winter happened, and everything started cracking, so they once again did it again. For 4 years, they worked on the same road, wasting more taxpayer money and a lot more resources on a road that they could have just paid a lot of money with a lot of care and just fixed it once.
So judging off what you just said, it seems like your biggest problems is not that infrastructure is underfunded necessarily, but that the funds are misused. Is that correct?
I think the funds are misused because they just get the crappiest stuff they can and the cheapest workers.
So what you want is not necessarily a big infrastructure spending bill versus like infrastructure reform almost.
I mean, we have the money and the money's there. It's just we don't use it right. I feel like that's a lot of our issues. We have the money, it's just we don't use it right.
Jim, do you think that if there was like a big, massive infrastructure spending bill, that would be good for the country / good for the economy? Or do you think that it really doesn't matter how much money they throw at the problem, because at the end of the day, if it's going to be rolled up in some kind of bill, it's going to all go to waste?
I mean, if it's going to be like the 50s where they decided to build highways everywhere, and those highways, from what I've known, weren't too terrible, then it wouldn't be bad. I mean, I've seen parts of highway that are like concrete, like bridges. They work pretty fine and they don't have to be changed too much. But concrete's expensive, and sometimes they do it. If you lay it down wrong, it can destroy the entire thing, unlike asphalt, where you just lay it down once and it's pretty much done. I think if we just spent a little bit more money on actual care on the product and not just the cheapest way for them, and then we actually pick companies that don't do, well, I can finish it with the less amount of money in a less amount of time, I feel like we'd be fine, but that's not how business works.
No, it's not. We always have to pay more for exactly the same thing, I feel like. So there's a really interesting case of a highway in the southwestern Pennsylvania area that a lot of people think is a really good highway, but they just can't use it ever because it goes nowhere. It's called Route 43. You have any opinions on that, Jim?
I think I know where you're talking about, a Route 43. I'm fine with how they did it, but because no one really uses it, I don't know how it can really be used. If it was like a 79 or a 376, I feel that it can we can use it a little bit more, and to tell, oh, this is good road, oh, this company did right, or this practice did right. But I feel if we just got a strip from one exit to another, took real good care of it, put the effort in it, and see, is this going to do the same thing we've been doing? Because if it's going to do the same thing, there's nothing we can do. But, I mean, we just don't put effort in anything anymore. We just feel like, oh, let's build a $1 billion airport that no one uses and forget about the road to get to them.
So I actually took Route 43 down from Pittsburgh to DC when I drove back as school closed.
Yeah.
Because that's the way Waze took me. And I have to say, it's a beautiful road, but also I think for a good while, I was the only person I could see on the road the entire time. And that's, part everyone sheltering, but also part no one uses that road, because I can assure you the PA Turnpike was not that empty.
Yeah, the reason why nobody uses 43 is because it's actually advertised to go to Pittsburgh, but actually the way to get to Pittsburgh, using Route 43, actually the highway hasn't been built yet, because there's issues with eminent domain, and because of some people's private property. So that has become an issue for that highway. But that said, it's a beautiful road. It might be beautiful just because people don't use it, but
I mean, it's lasted this long.
Yeah,
There's
that's
a
true.
reason to it.
But let's move on here from just roads. It's
I
interesting that
think
that's the first
Are
thing
we
that
are
comes
we
to
are we
mind.
striving towards the thing I've complained about the most in the United States?
Jim, what's the thing you complain most about in the United States?
All right. Asia and Europe have had the grand idea. Let's stay away from cars and let's go towards rails. The United States, back in the 18th and early 19th century, was the rail capital of the world. We decided everyone likes driving cars and we got rid of them. Doing so, we have wasted so much money and we've wasted so much time trying to get into cities or other parts of the United States. The United States' greatest flaw is our size. Because getting from one side of the country to the other, I think I looked up once, I said how to get to Disneyland, and it took, I think, 2 days car drive. That doesn't mean stopping, and that means me staying, and that means I would have to stay awake for 2 days. If a rail, in a rail system, you're able to get from the top of Japan to the bottom of Japan within 3 hours. I think the top of Japan and the bottom of Japan is also, I think, Maine to Texas. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the rough estimate.
it's
Doing
similar.
similar.
Yes.
So that means you can get from the top of Maine down to near the bottom of Texas and somehow get there within 3 hours. That is absurd speeds, and that's a lot faster than going through the terminal at an airport or anything. Rails are faster. If we start using a rail system like the Japanese, that has never had, I think they either never had or had very few cases of injuries on their rails for their bullet trains they've had for the last 50 years. So it's not only safer, it also saves them a lot of money, and you can also tax it very well. You just have to, here's a ticket. It's like a it's like a public transit system, but it's nationwide and it would be owned by the federals, and it would take a less road in space than a road because you would have one, two, maybe another two tracks going up and down. We strived away from that, and it's cost us dearly in our environment, I guess, landscaping, by just digging tunnels and highways, just destroying hills. And it's also cost us tons of time. I've heard nothing good about LA traffic, and I wish never to experience LA traffic.
Any comments on DC traffic, Eddie?
I mean, that has to be one of the best stump speeches I've heard on any infrastructure bill, but especially on trains. DC traffic is not as bad as LA traffic, but it is one of the top 5 worst. So I can speak to how annoying traffic can be. So I live about, I think, 30 miles outside of DC, almost directly due east. So the road I take goes straight into DC. On a good traffic day, on a weekday, it'll take typically like 45 minutes if I'm lucky to get in, which is, not great. And on some days, it's taken, an hour and a half or more to get in if it's a really bad day.
So,
And
Jim, to riff a little bit on the trains.
Yeah.
One of the things that a lot of people who are not super about trains will say is that, our trains are super inefficient. Look at Amtrak. Amtrak is pretty terrible in its current form. So are you looking at that and still saying, no, we need rails?
All right, so the rail system within the United States was the government decided to sell specific parts of land and give them to rail companies. Doing so, the rail companies have held on to these rails for over centuries. Doing so, you make more money on passing freight trains, slow, heavy trains, than passing passenger train. It was a lot fattening. Going down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to Disney World took 18 hours drive. And Amtrak would have taken a day and a half. The reason why is because Amtrak has to use other companies' lanes so they can somehow navigate down the East Coast. If the United States decided to just build their own rail line and use federal land that they can either buy from other people, companies, or destroy some highway system, they will not only have full control over these rail lines and having a set schedule to these rail lines, but they will also have a more open, broader way of using it. If that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
But so,
it's not Amtrak's fault. It's slow because it has to borrow. If it didn't have to borrow, it'd be a lot faster.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So there, we can kind of easily bridge onto the next topic here
Bridge on to the next topic. Get out of here.
Love bridges, first of all.
as to how would you be able to afford this, because your second most important policy is budget. So tell us a little bit about budget before we start getting into affording stuff.
All right. I have no problem paying taxes. If the government says, Jim, you owe me $1,000 because you worked so many hours and this is the tax rate right now, I'd say, good. If they said, we're going to bump it up even though nothing's changed, I say, okay, where's the money going to? If the money's going to educational systems, if it's going into actual welfare, if it's going into things that work and help people out, and it actually is a efficient government, then I'm fine with it. But if we're going to increase, as the military budget, if we're going to increase that, even though we have the highest budget out of the top 10 countries combined, there's no need for my tax money to be going into a budget that's already absurdly high. The way you can form the budget and the way that you can pay for stuff is go to it and look, is this necessary? I don't think that the military budget should be decreased more because we've already set ourselves that high. Decreasing it will just make it worse. Then people will be like, oh, next year we're gonna raise it higher. And it will probably double from what it was last time. The budget, I feel, is just, they see a bunch of numbers and they go, well, that thing over there, that can be given $2 billion. And then someone goes, well, why don't we just give it $4 billion just in case? And it's like, okay. So now this department, say of agriculture, has needed $2 billion. They're given another $3 billion. They're not going to want to lose that in $3 billion. So they're just going to waste that money and hope that the government's going to give them another $3 billion. It's the same thing as a business. You're never going to say, oh, we had too much money, because they're not going to give you more money back. And so I feel if the government used the money right and actually sat down and had like a big old firm of accountants sit down and move the numbers and make everything work pretty well from the year previous, I think we'd be fine. But we don't do that. And we just throw money at things and hope things go away.
I'd like to let the record show that I'm in the process of trying to get a job with the Government Accountability Office, the literal Office of Accountants that you were talking about.
You show them this episode
for 100 years.
You show them this episode, and you tell them exactly what I have issues with.
This is further proof of Jim's kind of moderate views, where largely he is kind of a fiscal conservative when it comes to balancing the budget and keeping it down and limiting federal spending, but only to an extent, because as he said earlier, he wants to see more funding for railways if they're used right. He wants to see the nationalization of railways for certain things.
If it's ran right, if the government's going to go, oh, this is nothing but crap, and they give me nothing but a scooter on some rail lines, I'm gonna go.
Jim, I do have another question for you on that line, because how you described how the ideal sort of government evaluation of the budget reminded me of something. So in I think it was 2000. It was either 2017 or 2018. This is back when Mick Mulvaney, who is now off to Ireland to be an ambassador. This is when Mick Mulvaney was still the acting, or was about to be the acting chief of staff. He was the guy who ran the Office of Management and Budget, the OBM, which is a super it's not a small office, but it's an office that not a ton of people know about. It's the OBM's job to, when the president says, hey, come up with my budget, the OBM makes the president's budget.
Okay.
So Mick Mulvaney did the budget for the Trump tax cuts. So it was when Trump said, okay, we're going to cut taxes, or I would like a tax cut, Mick Mulvaney was the guy who went into the books, led the effort, and said, all right, this is what we can cut, and this is where money needs to go. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when Mick Mulvaney did a press conference trying to explain, why he was cutting what he was cutting, his reasoning was whether or not he could ask a single mother to pay for it, or whether he could ask a low-income person to pay for it. So is that the kind of, so just before I go into the implications of like what actually got cut, is
Yeah.
that the kind of philosophy that you're looking for, or are you looking for a kind of philosophy that is less focused on the morality of paying for something and more about the efficacy?
I think it should. The way the tax is, what I have noticed is it's taking out as much as you've worked and how much you can survive. And that it adds depending on your situation. As like marriage, you get a benefit. Children, I think you get a benefit or something. I don't know. But I mean, like, I'm not married and I don't have kids, so I don't know the exact.
Our other schoolmates who's an accountant, I'm sure right now is shaking.
Both of them are probably. But the government should look and they should go, can my people pay the tax I'm throwing at them? Because we've seen in history that if you tax people more than what they can pay, something bad's going to happen. And so if the government looks at its people, all 320 million of them, and said, if I tax these people the right amount, is there an issue? If there's an issue, then they should go back and go, where did it stop and where can I fix it? I mean, you have the issues with the billionaire, like Elon Musk not getting any, being taxed for his company or something because he puts money in it somehow. I think, is it wrong? No. Is it right? I mean, it's wrong in the sense that he's not paying anything, but it's right that he can do it because we've allowed holes in the system for him to do it.
So you want to close loopholes?
I'd love to close loopholes. I don't think we need tax plans. I think we just need to keep on fixing the new one. I mean, the old ones.
So generally, you don't think the tax rates should necessarily rise or fall from where it is now, but just close all the loopholes?
Close the holes. That's all you need to do. If your boat is sinking because you have 3 holes in it, you're not going to go, well, this boat's done, I'm just going to buy a new one. You're going to go, I'm going to try and fix these holes.
All right, yeah, that's a pretty good analogy.
Yeah.
When you have a hole in a boat long enough that you name it a double Irish Dutch sandwich, you should probably plug the hole.
So speaking of boats, actually, here's another easy transition into, our armed forces and foreign affairs, which is your third most important topic. So tell us a little bit about what you think about foreign affairs, because there are 2 extremes typically here. And let's see if you're right in the middle.
My favorite president is Theodore Roosevelt. I liked him with one thing. He had the big stick policy. He would wave a stick and he'd just slap people with it. He wouldn't do anything aggressive towards other nations, except for his White Fleet, which I'm not 100% for, but, it's a meme. But I want a president that can go up to countries and they're insulting the United States, or they're insulting a United States ally, or they're invading a United States allied, or a pact that the United States has said, hey, we'll help you in this crisis. And they stand up and they go, no. They just go straight up, no. The United States president should go up to countries to say no, but they should also go up to countries and say, yeah, we want to work with you. Our ideas might be different or they're similar, but we want to work. I don't think that you should start using drones to attack generals in the middle of an airport because, hey, this guy's a bad guy. It's like, of course there's bad guys out there, but it's like you don't blow them up. You do it through the legal right. And you do it through the way that their country has done it. If their country feels that this man's essential to them and they like his policies, then that's what you do. We don't agree with Kim Jong-un, but you don't see us blowing up North Korea and all that. We have some policy issues against Russia and how they treat their gays. You don't see us just blowing up Putin. Like, the United States president or any sort of political leader within the United States should not attack another nation unless provoked, but should not go to the extremes where the other nation feels that they must attack back. It should be we're going to stand our ground, we're not going to push back, and we're not going to go back.
All right, so let's get a little more specific. So what are your thoughts on, let's say, Russia? Because you said earlier you want people to take a stand. So is that kind of the country you were thinking? So like Russia, who might be bullying, Central European countries, just taking a stand against that?
I think so. If the country comes to us and say, hey, the United States, we kind of need help, then we just go, okay, we'll help you to our best of our ability. We'll support you. if it involves war, then we'll have to think about it, but most likely we'll try and help. If the country is a decent country.
So what do you
piggybacking
think?
off of that.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, let's stick on the Russia issue because I think that we should probably get into something that's super politicized because I am genuinely curious. Let's not be media critics here because we can definitely do that another time. But is there any kind of action or reaction that you thought was missing after Russia's campaign to influence the election in 2016, or do you think that wasn't an issue at all and it was handled properly?
I don't think it was handled properly well whatsoever. I think one, it should have never have happened. We're the United States. I mean, I don't like us doing it to other countries. I don't like it being done to us. I think we should have. I know sanctions wouldn't have been brought up because Russia can just go veto in the UN, but I feel like we should have sat down and said, "Listen, what you did was wrong, and what you did wasn't right. Don't do it again, or we're going to have some serious issues." And I think we should have put tension on a rope, and we should have said, "Hey, we can cut this at any moment. We don't need you. You need us." And it's kind of like the mentality somewhat. I've been watching a lot of Cold War stuff, so it's like I might be a little bit influenced over that. But it's like we need to sit down and we need to look and we need to say, you can't do that. That's not right. But we're not going to attack you. We're just not going to be friendly towards you.
Do you think we should be cyber attacking Russia?
I know we are cyber attacking Russia. I wouldn't be. It would be dumb if we didn't. Sadly, in this day and age, if you're not getting the information, it's the same thing as spies. If we're not spying on them, they're definitely spying on us. I'd rather us protect ourselves a lot better instead of trying to find information to blackmail them with. So.
All right, interesting. So, what do you think about the U.S. kind of being the blank check for democracy across the world, as we have been since basically 1946, where we're willing to, not necessarily invade, but topple a regime or help out some pro-democracy rebels, or I mean, a more recent example would be acknowledge a leader who promises to be more democratic in Venezuela. What are your thoughts on that type of philosophy of U.S. foreign policy?
I don't think we should be going into countries, taking out their established government, and then throwing in a dictator that, oh, he's good with the United States. Oh, he likes the United States. Because then the people get mad because their government got overthrown. And then they're going to put up a leader who's going to hate the United States, as you can see in Iran, as you can see in Cuba, and you can see in North Korea. Like, it's just everywhere the United States has gone in and said, yeah, we don't like your government because it's not democracy and it's not helping the United States, and they just throw in someone. It's a fake person that has been thrown in by another person. I feel the acknowledgement of a democratic leader, though, in Venezuela is a lot better because it's going, yeah, we acknowledge him as the United States, but we're not going to do anything to put him into power. The people need to choose, and the people need to do something to put him into power. It's
the
usually
right of self-determination, if you will.
Yeah. Change doesn't happen unless the people want it. And so if you put in a fake idol and the people don't want it, they're just going to throw away the idol and grab their old one.
So let's talk about idols then, because there is no poster boy for being idolized in the world by his people like Kim Jong-un. How do you think that President Trump's how do you think that President Trump's handling of North Korea has been? Like, because he's definitely taken a lot more, I don't want to call it a lot more of a diplomatic, I guess it is technically a lot more diplomatic, but it's definitely very much focused on dialogue, and it's also focused on sort of doing things his own way. Do you want to see that in a president, or do you want to see a president who is a little bit more behind their experts?
So first of all, Trump wouldn't be talking to Kim Jong-un unless it was for Dennis Rodman. Thank you, Dennis Rodman. But I feel like a president going out and talking to other nations that we have issues with and sitting down and saying, hey, what's your deal? This is our deal. And they just sit down and they talk and they figure out, oh, North Korea doesn't like us because we do this. Well, we don't like North Korea because they do this. And you get that communication, and then communication turns into a good old dialogue, and the dialogue turns into some sort of thing that you can circle around and go, we agree on this. And then after that, after a while, it goes to, oh, we agree on a couple things, and keeping the communications going. But if North Korea is going to keep on testing nuclear weapons in I think the Sea of Japan, and they're just like, oh, it's just friendly, and Japan's like, yeah, we're very terrified of this, then I think if we had a communication talking with them and saying, hey, yeah, Japan's not too friendly with this. We're a lot closer to Japan than we are North Korea. And North Korea's like, well, I think I would want a president that can sit down and go, listen, we can talk. I'm going to be nice as much as possible, but if you start making it very physical and very deadly, I'm not going to talk. I'm going to show action, but that should be the last thing. That should be like not World War II, where Britain dealt with Hitler and said, yeah, you can take the land, but World War II and said, in World War I and said, yeah, you can't invade Belgium. We're going to do something about it.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is generally your foreign policy views are that the U.S. should generally stay out of issues unless it directly involves them or unless they're asked to come in.
Exactly.
So, to put another way, isolationism, but with a big stick. So kind of, again, a perfectly moderate stance, not militarist, but not isolationist, right in between.
What just to let me get the cap on foreign policy, because I can't have a foreign policy discussion without talking about China.
Yep. Okay.
China has definitely been. I feel like I feel like a year ago, people weren't talking about China a whole lot. I mean, before a year ago, it wasn't too much of a conversation, but for whatever reason, China became a more and more important issue as the Democratic debates evolved. President Trump signed phase 1 of a trade agreement at the beginning of this year. And I feel like talking about China is something that's done a lot more from a political perspective rather than strictly from a foreign policy discussion. So is there anything particular that strikes you about China, and is there anything that you'd like to hear a candidate running for any office say about the Middle Kingdom?
I would want, so mainly a big thing is the South China Sea and that whole 9-point line thing. I think I think a candidate should go up to China and go, listen, what you're doing is wrong, and what you can do is going to make a lot of countries angry and can make a lot of businesses angry. And they should also go to China and go, listen, a lot of our companies are also working for you. We would like you to treat your workers better so our companies can have good relations, because we can just stop that, I feel. And if the companies leave the United States, that's what happens. I mean, we've lived without them before. We can do it again. I think China's difficult to work with because it's a lot more backward. And not backwards. It's a lot different than us. It treats its citizens a lot different, I feel. I mean, I'm kind of glad of the Hong Kong situation. It hasn't turned into a TS-89 situation. But I don't think they're doing it right, because I think they're forcing their ideals onto the people of Hong Kong. Yeah, I think they're supposed to, if I'm right, Alex, they're supposed to wait like another 10, 15 years later.
Technically, they're supposed to wait until 2047.
Yeah. So, yeah, like about 27 years they're supposed to wait. I think the president of the United States should come down and go, listen, this was the deal. This is what you signed. This is what we're going for, a slow transition.
So do you think the president should be opening a dialogue with Hong Kongers? Do you think the president should be trying to influence that situation?
I think the president should first talk to China, because it is their land, and go, listen, you made a deal. don't go back on it. And if China goes back on it, then it's like, okay, we're not going to throw guns at them and go, hey, just start shooting people. I think we'll be like, publicly, we support the Hong Kong people because they want a democratic, they want democratic elections. I don't. We shouldn't invade. We should never put military troops in another nation unless that nation has physically attacked us or has asked for our aid and they really need it. So
what about Bush's declaration back when he was president that an attack on Taiwan will be considered an attack on the United States? Kind of similar scenario where China claims that territory, but it has a lot more autonomy than the rest of China.
It depends on the national system. So I like Taiwan being its own self and being ran by itself, but I don't like Taiwan saying they are China. They're not China. China is the thing to the west of it. If we are personally allied with Taiwan, then they need to be put at the same status as South Korea and Japan. But we haven't. We've kind of stopped and we said, it's a little blurry. You know, we'll jump. Here's a line. We'll jump back and forth until we get tired. And I feel like that's what we're doing with Taiwan. Taiwan situation's confusing because Taiwan says they're free, but China says they're tightening. China owns Taiwan. So it's a sticky situation. China has no historical claim over Taiwan because in the 1800s, I think the 1800s, it's the 17 or 1800s, Han Chinese people started to migrate into Taiwan, which had a lot more Aboriginal type people. They weren't Aboriginals, but they were more Aboriginal than they were actually mainland China. And so it's like you have to think, if Taiwan's going to say they're China, then they're going to be involved with the Chinese Republic. If they're going to say we're Taiwan and we're different and we've always been different, and China goes, well, no, that's not fair, then the United States should go, well, if they're saying they're different and they've been different and you haven't been doing anything about it until recently, then that means they're different.
All right. So we have about 20 minutes left, so let's spend that on the last two policies. I don't have a smooth transition for this one, unfortunately, but
oh darn.
As
Jim,
you know,
you're a teacher.
A future educator. This matters to you. So, what are your thoughts on education?
Education, I think the United States does it terribly, and we should change it completely. I think teachers.
Right.
Yeah, I don't like the unions because the unions do protect the good teachers, and they do protect them from businesses or school districts, and they protect them from getting fired. But they're also keeping the crappy ones doing terrible jobs. I'd rather have a teacher that stands up there and gives an effort every day, but I think they're the lamest teacher ever, than a teacher that sits there, gives me a packet, doesn't even check for it. In high school, I did nothing for my American government class, and I got a 91. That is wrong. I had to, another class where I literally sucked at it. I had to struggle and do it. I appreciate that more than the class I got a 91 constantly because I did nothing. It was an easy class, but I got nothing out of it. I think the education system should get rid of teachers that are bad. I think they should hire more good teachers. I think they should learn on other nations. I think I went to Finland last May. They do a great job on dealing with their teachers. They have 5 periods a day. The kids are allowed to go anywhere within the school and just relax if it's too stressful or something's going on. The teachers teach the way they want to, and they don't have to do any standardized test taking. The students do until their senior year of high school, which means students and school districts don't have to stress about, oh, I have to get a B or I have to get a certain amount of number just so I can go on to the next grade or so my school can get the money for us to get a projector. I think the United States should also make the education system not district-based and not state-based, but more of a federal-based, because in New York, I'll get a teaching license within Pennsylvania. My license will only work in 49 states except for New York, meaning New York puts more care and more education system within their students than any other state in the union. California spends more money on their students, and they're 45. They're the 45th best educated state. If you collect all of California's money and New York's education system and you throw them all together across the board, and each student from a poor Alabama school, and you give them the same education as someone from Los Angeles, California, then you'll have a higher education system, a higher college acceptance rate, and probably a higher degree of smart people within your nation. I think the United States has done poorly, and making standardized testing a mandatory thing is an awful thing.
So standardized testing is interesting, and I have a question for you unrelated after this, but just like fun history for our listeners, that it started in the Cold War, so we could have just regular stats to prove that we were smarter than the Soviets at every step along the way. So that's why we have standardized testing in general, is so we could outsmart the commies.
Now we have standardized tests to prove that China is smarter than us.
Yeah, that's what
which
China
is
has
what they do
also.
as far as like manipulating things with whether it's the international test to enroll at an American university, the TOEFL. Is there anything in particular? Because what a lot of people say is that sure, you can get rid of standardized testing, but you need to have something to replace it. Would you, number one, would you replace standardized testing? Do you want to see that replaced with anything? What's the kind of system that you're looking for, and what do you want that system to emphasize?
I would think standardized testing can be replaced by a more relaxed school system.
So
I went to high school.
Are we talking about like essays? Are we talking about?
I'm talking about where if a student is having such a tough time dealing with this, and they're too busy and they can't think straight, instead of struggling and screwing around for 20 minutes trying to figure out why can't I get this one problem right, they get up, they walk down the hall, they get a fresh breath of air, and they come back. I think if you treat the students like people and not like a category system where they do one thing, next thing, third thing, fourth thing, and throughout the day they're just nothing but a number moving around a classroom, then I think the students will accept it a lot and deal with it a lot better. Because if you have a student that's more relaxed and more willing to learn, then they're going to learn better. Then you're going to have a student who forces themselves to struggle through math and go, I don't understand this. And then the next moment they're going to reading, which they don't understand.
So
a more relaxed, the United States system is too rigid and there's no room for anything, and it's only math and science.
You could say there's too much structure.
There's too much structure, of course. But if you put them down and you give them something to work with or something just to relax with, and they can actually take a breath throughout the day, then they'll most likely improve through the day because they've taken a break. Lunch and recess isn't a break. It's a meal, and you get to put energy out.
So you said earlier that you would want a federalization of the education system. Does that mean you'd support a Common Core curriculum, minus like state history, but otherwise, would you support a Common Core?
If they spend the money right, and they do the work, and they don't just go, well, this is the way it is. This is the easiest route we can do. That's fine. But if they sit down and they get all the education people in the United States and they go, okay, let's make a plan. Let's make a curriculum for these students. And let's give money to schools that don't have the funds, like Upper St. Clair, Alex, which you come from. They don't need more money. But people in Carleton, they don't have much money. So giving money that Upper St. Clair has and giving it to a school that doesn't have that much money, or giving it I don't think private schools should be, I think they should follow the same curriculum. I don't think they should be given money though, because they're private.
So this is an interesting thing. So Upper St. Clair, which is where I went to for high school and elementary school actually, the way they do their education system is it's tied to property taxes. And the Upper St. Clair School District, that township is generally more affluent than the surrounding townships. And so by tying it to property taxes, properties are already valued higher than most other places. So it's a pretty solid way of funding the school system, and the school is generally considered to be really good, especially for a public school. But that can take people away from the area. Not a lot of people, but some people, because they say, well, I don't want to pay property taxes, higher property taxes because of the schools. And because it's actually a local tax, it's, somebody could quite rightfully say, hey, it's not fair to just take this money and give it to somebody else. So would you like to see like the addition of a national tax, and then education removed from the state, like the state budget, the state purview? And so then the money is sent all the way up the chain and then redistributed.
I
Is
think
that
so.
what you're
Yes.
looking for? Okay.
Yes. Because you have poor states like Alabama, like Mississippi, and you have richer states like California and New York. If you grab all 50 states and territories too, because they're U.S. citizens, they have the right to our education system, and you just grab them all together and you just go, okay, you would have to go, which state needs it the most? Then you go through that route. And then you go, okay, which region of that state needs it the most? And then you just go, which school needs it the most? And you do it through that way. After it somewhat balances and it's somewhat within a 5% range of the schools have the same supplies as each other, they have the same books, they have the same technology, they have Wi-Fi going through it, they have ways for students to connect online. And then you go, okay, every school is just going to get pretty much the same thing, and we're going to keep on funding it. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to pull stuff from other stuff and we're going to put it into our children. Because to build a good nation, you got to make sure that you build the foundations right. And if you don't build the foundations for children right, you're just going to have a crappy building at the end.
All right, so one last question on education before we move on to talk about the last topic for a little bit. You said at the beginning that you think the biggest problem is with the teachers union and tenure. Do you think that's a problem with unions in general, or just the way that a specific union implemented the rules that they have?
A stat I once heard was in Michigan. No, it was Minnesota. 55 doctors out of one. For every 55 doctors, one of them gets fired. For every 72 lawyers, one of them gets fired. The teachers' range was in the hundreds, I think around 300 or 400, one of them gets fired. That means there is a large amount of bad teachers that must do terrible, terrible things, as in be sexually assault someone, be very violent, be very racist, do something awful to get fired. I don't think you should be good at your job. The unions protect everyone, and when they mean everyone, they mean everyone. And I don't think that's right. I think the unions should pick the people that are dedicated to their job and that look at students and go, you're not a nuisance, you're the thing I want to help improve. And I think the unions were good in the beginning. I think they had great ideas, but now I think it's an idea of, well, we just got to get everyone, because if everyone pays their bills, then the people in the union that run it are going to have a pretty nice check at the end. Because I think there was a DC woman that was trying to do that within her school districts, and the union said, you can't do that, and they stopped it, and I think she got fired a couple years later, or she just got limited in power. I think the unions get in the way of firing bad teachers and replacing them with good.
Okay, and then moving over to the last topic, I was surprised to see this on the list, to say the least.
Yeah,
you put energy use. So tell us about that.
The United States has always been a coal and an oil baron out of all. We have Rockefeller, we have the coal mines, and from the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Appalachians and like Pittsburgh, woo, yeah, coal mines. But it is the 21st century. The coal miners who are mining are no longer the nice, fresh 20-year-olds. They're 30, 40, 50, 60-year-olds who are doing this. And we're the United States, the leading country in technology. And yet we have not found a sufficient way to replace anything. Because electrical cars, they have issues because you got to generate them. What do you generate them with? Well, diesel engines or electricity from power plants that are not environmentally safe or not fuel efficient. They use up and they put in an electric car. So you using an electric car means nothing anymore. It's just, I'm just using something else to power it. I think if we sit down and we go, okay, We have a bunch of rivers because in the Burr we got 3. Woo. Um, we have a bunch of rivers, and we can use them not to dam but to turbine. Put in a bunch of. We have a lot of old lock. I want to say lock foundations where we used to have locks, and we replaced those with turbines. Power that through electricity. I'm not the best fan of nuclear energy, but it's better than a coal and an oil. Natural gas, I'm not a huge fan of it. I think the United States should strive more towards not a New Deal and replace all the cows and take out all the planes and cars and everything within the next 12 years. I think it should be a slow process where instead of like you brought with the Chinese deal that was signed a couple of months ago, where we're only selling China energy, but it has to be these specific energies. I think it should be let's try and whittle out the coal miners. Let's try and whittle out the oil pumpers or whatever, oil barons, and let's try and replace them with something that is better and we can deal with. Because there's other nations in the world that are doing pretty fine on the way they're going, but we're still stuck on, we gotta protect them coals.
Yeah, coal miners in the United States, I think there's about 70,000 coal mining jobs in the United States. I saw that stat somewhere.
And we're trying to protect them.
Yeah. Well, there's also 114,000 people who work for JCPenney.
Yeah.
So
And
coal mining jobs are really good paying jobs, though. So
yeah.
I mean, they're good paying jobs, but at the end of the day, they're going to get black lung and they're going to die at age 60 or 70. It's not a good job. You're going to get a lot of money. You're just not going to live long.
That's the truth.
So before we wrap up, just give us a little one sentence on why you're considering voting for Uncle Joe, a good sentence on why you're considering voting for the Don.
So for Joe, I think he would be good in the sense that he's done this before. He's caring. He's been vice president. Everyone loved him. I think he has a decent head on his shoulders, and I think he listens to people. Seeing in South Carolina, he got a majority of the minority group vote in South Carolina. For Trump, I think if he stops tweeting, 100% stops tweeting, and he actually sits down and listens to his words, and he thinks out his plans, and he doesn't do it irrational, or he just sits down and looks and says, I think he would be a good president. I think both of them have good qualities. Joe is more relaxed and more calming and would like to do the talking way. Trump, he's aggressive, but he's not insane, and he has businesses, so he has an idea, and he hasn't started a World War III yet. So I mean, it could always happen, but I mean,
it could.
He hasn't done anything that has made me go to the point where I say I'm done with him. I'm going to vote for him. And Joe's just been it for so long. So
words definitely to keep in mind for anybody who might want the vote of an undecided person living in a swing state.
Especially a swing state that was decided by, I think, 2,000 votes total. That one vote goes a long way.
I think let's bump that up. It was either 50 or 80,000.
Same thing.
But Allegheny County, southwestern Pennsylvania, swing district of the swing state.
Yes.
And that's about all we have. But before we end the episode tonight, we'd have finally some actually exciting news regarding an upcoming guest.
Yeah, so we've talked almost exclusively about the national race so far in the podcast, but with that race kind of coming to a standstill with coronavirus and also just with Joe Biden being pretty much the presumptive Democratic nominee, we now have the opportunity to talk about some of the local news and some local candidates to see what they might be bringing to the 2020 election cycle.
And finally, Luke Negron, ladies and gentlemen, the presumptive Republican candidate, the presumptive Republican nominee for Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district, next week, not live because we're recording, but on this show, will be joining us for a discussion about his campaign thus far. It's his first campaign, and what a time to be having your first campaign, how the campaign trail has been going, and what he plans to be doing in the 18th district to try and win a district that has for so long been a Democratic stronghold.
Yeah.
Now, that episode is going to be coming out on April 3rd or April 4th, so look for it then. You do not want to miss it, even though it'll be there for the end of time.
He's a very interesting and very unique candidate. He brings a lot more to the table than you'd expect from, just like, he's a lot more than just a generic Republican. So it'll be a very interesting interview, to say the least. So it is now 8:28 p.m. on this Thursday evening, so our time's just about up.
Our intro and outro music is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda. It's been produced by Elise Duda.
You can find a recording of this podcast on our YouTube channel, Catch 52. Now that we're uploading the video that we're recording on Zoom with it, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you get your favorite podcasts. Also, make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to stay updated on air times, episode topics, and upcoming guests.
Jim, thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me, boys.
We welcome your comments, your feedback, and your suggestions. We're looking forward to definitely getting on a more regular schedule with Friday or Saturday uploads. But as always, have a good Friday and a great weekend.